Let's see. Okay, so you're all very welcome to week 2 of the course, How to Live in a World on Fire, which we've previously called Not About Being Good. So I hope everyone was here last week. If you weren't here last week, don't worry, that's fine. Um, Hopefully you got to see the video from last week. Even if you didn't, that's okay. You're right. They'll be able to catch up with what we've done and what we'll do. To give you a sense of what we'll do tonight, so let me just share my screen here. Okay, so what we'll do tonight is we'll have a review of last week, and we'll have a review of the home practice. Today, and then we'll move into obviously exploring ethics more. So looking at ethics, the benefits for ourselves, but also how ethics is intrinsically bound up with our relationships with other people. And especially then we'll look at what Sangharakshita, the man who founded our Buddhist community, calls the power mode and the love mode. And we'll have a short breakdown, and after the break we'll look at this whole question of our sphere of concern and expanding out our sphere of concern to include more and more people. And that'll take us up to nearly 9 o'clock. So we'll also do, we'll look at home practice and what the home practice is for the coming week. And we'll also look at answering some questions, yeah. So to remind you of what we did last week, we had some introductions. We talked about, well, we introduced ourselves a bit, and myself and Tony introduced ourselves. And we looked at the question, what is ethics? And we looked at conventional ethics, authoritarian ethics, and what Buddhism would call, sorry, I forgot to silence my phone, natural ethics. So conventional ethics, not authoritarian ethics. So conventional and authoritarian, you do because everyone else, you're good because everyone else is, or because an authority tells you to. Whereas natural ethics is the ethics that comes out of living in line with your ethos, which is what ethics really is. It's living in tune with your ethos, a kind of a natural connection that we have with other people in particular. And we looked at, well, why be ethical? And in particular, we did that reflection, actions having consequences. And after the break last week, we looked at the law of karma and the 5 niyamas. And we saw how you can't blame people for their misfortunes because there's a lot more at play in life than karma. Our thoughts and our emotions are themselves actions. So karma just means action. And every action we have will likely have a fruit. And the other thing we looked at is we'll tend to create the world we live in. And it's a natural process. There's no God or anything outside operating it. So the home practice then was to read the introduction, chapter 1 of the book, if you could. I know not everyone had the book, but I was asking you to read chapter 1, I think was the one I emphasized in particular, and the introduction, if you could. Clarify your values and how to live by them. So again, in line with that thing about ethics being about your ethos. We looked at to see if you could see karma in your everyday life, see how the actions you have now will shape your future day, for example. And can you live with more kindness this week? That's what all of ethics boils down to, being less self-preoccupied, and can you live with more kindness? And I was encouraging you to keep a small notebook and to record thoughts about how it goes for you during your week, okay? So that's what we looked at. Welcome if you've just arrived. I see a few more people have arrived. So what I wanted to do, what we're also going to do now, and I warned you about this last week, is we're going to go into small groups in a few minutes to discuss how we get on during the week, or see if we have any questions that we want to bring back to the big group. Before we do that, let's just do a short meditation just to arrive and to settle in, because many of you will be coming from a busy day and so on. So it's good to arrive and settle in. So if you want to set yourself up so that you're comfortable and alert, and I'll just do a short 3 minutes, 5 minutes led meditation just to help us arrive. So settling into your posture, closing your eyes, noticing whatever sounds you can hear. Having a sense of the room around us. Our contact with the chair, with the cushions, with the floor. How vividly can we experience this? Becoming aware of the legs and feet, allowing them to be heavy, to relax. Allowing the sitting bones to support our weight even more, letting go into those, into the support of the chair, the cushions. Becoming aware of our back and our spine and our shoulders. Becoming aware of our stomach and our abdomen. Our hands and our arms. If it helps to follow the breath to help you stay in your body, you can follow the breath as well. Becoming aware of what we can feel in our face. And our ears. And then resting in our heart center, in our chest, noticing the rise and fall of the rib cage as we breathe in and as we breathe out. And with each out breath, just letting go a little bit more into the support of the chair, cushions. And starting to take in the room around us once more, the sounds we can hear. Moving our awareness back out into the room. And when you're ready, starting to reintroduce movement. Wiggling fingers and toes. Coming out of your seated posture if you want to. In your own time, bringing the practice to a close. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a bit. You're going to get an opportunity to talk to someone that isn't me. So be brave, be open, be ready to be kind. And what we're going to do is Tony's going to send you into small breakout rooms, and we're going to have breakout rooms ideally of about 4 people each. And what I want you to do in the room is I want you to talk about how your home practice went this week. If you weren't here last week and you haven't done the home practice, you could talk about what has brought you to the course or what inspires you about ethics. Now the course, the rooms will be for 12 minutes and there'll be 4 of you in each one. So you get to talk for about 3 minutes. Now, 3 minutes actually isn't very long. It isn't very long when you're discussing stuff. So it'll feel, you might think, oh God, what will I say for 3 minutes? But it's actually a very short period of time. So what I'd like you to do again is just talk about how you got on with the home practice during the week. You know, is there anything interesting you noticed? Just to remind you, the home practice again, I'll just share it one more time. You know, so read the book, keep clarifying your values and how to live by them. See if you can see karma or notice karma in your daily life. And can you live with more kindness? And I always also encourage you to keep a notebook and maybe do a short inventory every evening about how you got on that day in terms of your practice of kindness. The other thing I'd say is just to note each room has a room number. So please do notice what room number you're in, because if you drop out of the call, you'll come back to the main room and we'll put you back in the group again. But we won't be able to do that unless you can remember what room you're in, okay? So remember what room number you're in, and don't forget to unmute yourself. You will be able to unmute yourself in the group. I think you should be able to message us from the group if there's any problems. And if your bandwidth is up for turning on your video, do that. If not, you know, just if someone hasn't their video on, it probably means their bandwidth isn't good enough or they don't want to be seen, which is fine too. And if you really don't want to go in a group, you can just stay in the main room. But I'd really encourage you to go to a group and meet people and chat about how you got on. Have I forgotten anything? And Tony will send a message every 3 minutes. So there's 12 minutes in total. Tony will send a message every 3 minutes, just reminding you to move on to the next person. So do keep an eye on time, because otherwise the last person will get squeezed out and not get to say what they want to say. And if you run out of time, you can just see if you want to come up with any questions to bring, or even if you don't run out of time, if there's any questions that emerge, you can bring them back to this main group and type them in the chat when you get back. Okay, hope that's all clear. So Tony, do you want to hit the button? So you'll see something come up on the screen, and it'll invite you to join a room. So join the breakout room, yeah? I think you're muted, by the way, don't forget. Yep, we're all back in. Okay, good. So hopefully that wasn't too traumatic. Hopefully that was an enjoyable experience chatting to other people on the course. So hopefully you got a chance to talk about how your home practice was. I think it is nice to be able to say to people just how your practice has gone or not gone indeed. And as the course goes on, what you'll actually probably find is you have a few ethical conundrums, you know, more kind of interesting and juicy ethical issues will emerge, so that you'll, it is actually really useful to be able to talk to people as well. So if you want, Janet said that was very enjoyable. So maybe you want to comment in the chat box any questions or comments from your week's practice, or any questions that you have that you want to discuss again. Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'll note that actually, what you just said there, Sam, at the groups. So if you have any questions, send them in before we move on with this week's material. So, and hopefully you got on well in the home practice. It'd be interesting to hear if people kept journals, or if they noticed themselves being able to be more kind or live in tune with your ethos and so on. So you can keep them, you can send them in now if you want. And in a moment we'll continue on with the material. Okay, so Julianne was a little unclear on exactly what karma was, and Mairead asked me to clarify the law of karma again. So the law of karma, from the Buddhist point of view, is really simple. So what it's saying is that if you have an action, it'll shape how you experience the world. Yeah. So if you act ungenerously or unkindly, you'll kind of you'll end up creating a world for yourself which is a bit more separated from other people, where you're not as kind as you could be, where your habit is towards unkindness rather than kindness. You'll tend to feel less connected to other people, and you might even find people relate to you differently then as a result. And if you act with regularly with kindness, if the action, the karma just means action, is kindness, generosity, you will live in a brighter, more connected world. And I mean, it's unclear to my mind how much of that is just your own subjective, how much it affects your own subjective take on the world, and how much it is objective as well, in terms of, you know, the world kind of shapes itself to what you do. In a way, Buddhism would say that, in a way, those are two crude categories to think about in terms of in here, out there. It's much more interwoven than we give credit for. So when you act on the basis of skillful activities, you will shape the world in a positive way that you experience. And when you act on the basis of unskillfulness, which I'll remind you about again in a few minutes when we come back to that, you create a certain world for yourself which is less pleasant, basically. Laura's asking about clarifying your values. I think one question is, what do I most fundamentally believe? I mean, the values will become clear on the course, hopefully, as well. We'll be looking at what the Buddha's values are. Like, I believe, like kindness, just being kind is a value. You know what I mean? Trying to be as aware as you can is a value. Trying to be generous is a value. Trying not to cause harm is a value. Trying to you know, live by the truth is a value. Those kinds of things. I mean, they are a bit general. So as the course goes on, we'll get more and more particular about how you can express those in your lives. Laura says, when we talk about values and ethics, would there be a difference between the two, or are they the same for the purposes of the course? That's fine if you weren't here last week, Laura. So I was just pointing out last week that the word ethics comes from the word ethos, which means, so really what ethics means is to live according to your values. So ethics is an action. It's something you're living out in the world. It informs your actions, whether they're physical actions, whether they're actions of speech, or whether they're actions of thought. So a thought is an action as well in Buddhism. You're sitting there thinking unkind thoughts about someone, that will have an effect. You're thinking they're sitting kind thoughts about someone, that will have an effect as well. So it isn't really, so really ethics is about living in line with your highest values. And for Buddhism, as I mentioned last week, the highest values in Buddhism, and you don't have to take these on, but the highest values in Buddhism is that there is a state of freedom possible, and you yourself and you can help other people gain that state of freedom. A recurring theme in our group is how to negotiate boundaries with respect to metta and not being a pushover. So we talked about that quite a bit last week, and I think Eileen talks about the same thing. Yeah, so it came up quite a bit last week about you know, if you're kinder, if you're trying to be generous, does that mean that you'll leave yourself vulnerable, or you leave yourself more open to things? And I was pointing out last week, I hope I did anyway, that sometimes the kindest thing is to say no to people and not engage with what they're trying to engage in you with. The kindest thing might be to not engage with their crap, to be honest, you know, or the kindest thing might be to do what you need to do to keep your boundaries and you know, to look after yourself, basically. That is often the kindest thing to do. Don't just assume kindness looks like a certain kind of way. Kindness can manifest in all kinds of ways. And sometimes I've seen some of the kindest behavior in people, behavior where people are saying, look, that is just not on what you did there, Vajrashira. You can't behave like that, you know, and kind of giving me a bit of a lashing, actually. And actually, when it's done well, I mean, obviously that's not always kind, but I've had those kinds of conversations where it's been done very, very kindly, and I've been really able to take it on as a result. So kindness doesn't just look like being nice. And as I said last week, a nice Buddhist is a dead Buddhist. So it's not about being nice. It's not about being a walkover. Kindness is actually really robust. So in terms of answering your question, how do you do that? Well, I mean, don't compromise your boundaries. You know what I mean? Look after yourself. You're no use to anyone else if you're in a ditch yourself. You know, you can't help someone else out of the ditch if you're in the ditch. So do what you need to do to be in good states yourself, and then it might be then the place then to go and help people too. So don't compromise your own well-being. Miriam was saying she kept a journal, but she's also doing the other course. A few of you are doing the other course to going deeper, and they got a bit mixed up. That's okay. That's okay. I mean, there's a lot in the two courses. There's a lot in the two courses, but hopefully they'll become clear over the coming weeks. Okay, so you can keep the. I know I'm not really able. I know like these questions you could spend the whole night on, but let's keep going anyway. And someone else added a reminder every morning to be kind today and to meditate. That helps. So that's really good. So you might want to put a reminder in your phone every morning. Remember to be kind, because most of us don't set out to be unkind to people. We just forget that it's really important to be kind. Yeah. So most of ethics, I think, most of meditation, a lot of the time, is just remembering to be ethical, remembering to be focused in meditation, for example. It's written in the book, that this is from Carolina, that Buddhism teachings are not to generate our moral sense, but to draw it out of us. So, you know, we're not telling you how you must live. What we're saying is these are what the Buddha said, and what we're trying to do in this course is to draw out our own ethical sensibilities. It's one of the reasons why I find Buddhism exciting. It won't give you an easy answer of what to do. You know, so what does kindness look like for you? How, like, to go back to people's earlier point, what would kindness look like for you in a way that, given the particular circumstances of your life, how will it manifest in a way that's appropriate for you, or how can you manifest it, and to be different for everyone? And that's why Buddhism is really exciting, and at times it's very challenging, you know. Okay, so let's keep going. So I wanted to share a very famous quotation with you and just spend a bit more time on ethics. So this is a famous quote from a very old Buddhist text called the Dhammapada, and many of you will have heard of it before, so I'll read it out. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. Experiences are, and then I've left this out, but it repeats the first stanza again. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So this is the opening lines of one of the most influential Buddhist texts in history. Yeah. So it's saying if you speak or act with an impure mind, suffering follows, just like a cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox. And if one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So these would be traditional Indian images. And just to say as well that when we talk about purity here, or impurity, we don't mean purity in the sense of absolute moral purity or whatever. We mean purity in the sense of, you talk about pure orange juice, it means that it doesn't have additives. You talk about pure spring water, it doesn't have dirt in it. So it's not an absolute statement of being. It's more like it is pure of ultimately greed, hatred, and delusion. So this is a very famous text, and it's highlighting karma again. So when one acts with an impure mind, when one acts out of greed, hatred, and delusion, it's a painful way to be. In itself, being greedy is painful. In itself, hatred is painful, ultimately. In itself, delusion is painful. And it's a burden to us, just like the cartwheel is a burden to the ox, and we have to drag it along with us. And when we're skillful, when we're positive, we experience joy, we experience happiness. When we act on the basis of the opposite of greed, hatred, and delusion, which would be generosity, love, wisdom, and so on, we experience joy and delight. And I guess one of the reasons why we experience suffering is that, well, first of all, the state itself is painful, as I've said, but also because we have this sense of remorse that we might have not lived in tune with how we'd like to live. We feel bothered at some level, and we have a sense of conscience. And This is very important in Buddhism. So it's important to cultivate a state of freedom from any kind of regret or remorse. It's important to feel like you've acted your best. In week 4, we'll look at what happens when you fall short of your ideals, or week 5, I can't remember which. But what you're trying to cultivate here is that delight, that lightness, that joy that comes from living an ethically wholesome life, that comes from living a life free of the negatives of greed, hatred, and delusion. And this word in Buddhism is called, well, it's called pamoja, which is the old word for it in the Buddhist language. But really what it means is a kind of a light, positive delight, a joy that arises from being ethical. And this is very much anyone's experience that I've ever talked to in Buddhism, that when you try and live a more ethical life, you do tend to be a bit lighter, freedom from remorse, a joy, a connection, and so on. So in a way, that in itself is enough to practice ethics. You can see the benefits for yourself. But actually, it's not just about ourselves. So we don't just practice ethics. We don't just try and live an ethical life so that we can be happier ourselves. It touches into one of the central mysteries of the spiritual life. You could say that, in a way, the only way to be truly happy yourself is to care for other people, is to get beyond your own self-concern, so to speak, and is to care for other people as much as you care for yourself. Yeah, it's when we're in relation to other people. It's when we try and act for the benefit of other people, in particular, that we feel, I think, the greatest sense of joy, the greatest sense of meaning, and the greatest sense of truth in a way. So ethics is relational. It's relational to other people. And often, I mean, you might have well have found this yourself. You can be quite happy in yourself and feel like, oh, well, I'm making lots of progress here. I'm very metaful. But then you come in contact with other people and it really tests your meta, and they can get very grumpy very quickly again. So really, it's in relation to other people that the whole realm of ethics is played out. So ethics is interrelational. Yeah, it's interrelational. I was very struck years ago by a friend of mine, Bodhidharma, who one or two of you might know. And he was talking about why he became a vegetarian. So this was, I think it was before he was getting into Buddhism, or around the same time, but he was living in Germany. And he was living with a hippie who was vegetarian. And Bodhidharma used to really love his bacon butties and so on, and would eat them regularly. And the guy said to him, "You can't eat your brothers, man. You can't eat your brothers, man." So, and from that moment, he realized, oh, I have to be vegetarian, you know? So it was in that he saw the fuller bringing out for him of the first ethical guideline, the base ethical guideline is not causing harm and trying to live in loving kindness. It was only when it was interracial that he saw a much deeper depth of it. So that's the positive vision. Then the more negative one, I don't know about you, but where I feel most keenly a sense of remorse or regret is when I feel like I've let someone else down, you know? For me, I can kind of let myself down a bit, you know, I can kind of, you know, I can be unkind to myself maybe, or I can indulge in like mindless craving a lot, and I can kind of, I can handle it, it's fine. But it's when I let other people down that I most keenly feel that sense of ethical regret. So both positively and negatively, we feel ethics much more strongly interrelationally, and ethics really is interrelational. So ethics isn't, to summarize all this bit, ethics isn't just about making ourselves feel better. It's about, ethics is interrelational and trying to help other people and bring it out in the world in relation to other people. Yeah. So I hope that's clear, that ethics is interrelational. I hope we can see it in our own lives. And part of the home practice this week will be, for example, trying to do random acts of kindness for others in your lives, or even people you don't know very much. So trying to bring and express kindness in your life around you. Yeah. And it's only until you start expressing kindness in your life, in whatever way that looks like, that you really get your kindness practice going. Yeah. Okay, so again, feel free to write any comments or questions in the thing. I have a little bit more to go on with, so I just want to continue on a little bit. So the next bit I want to talk about is a teaching by Sangharakshita. So Sangharakshita, as I've mentioned, is the man who founded our Buddhist community. And he has this teaching, which I think is, it's very simple, actually. It sounds almost too simple in some ways, but I found it very useful, actually, I have to say. So I'll just share my screen again with you. So he talks about what you could call the power mode and the love mode. Hopefully this isn't a bit too cliched for you. But what he talks about is we can operate in two different modes, and one is the power mode. So the power mode is where you use violence against someone else, yeah? So violence means doing to another person, by whatever means, what they do not want us to do to them, yeah? So doing to another person, by whatever means, what they do not want us to do to them. So Tony and I live in the same house, and we were talking earlier about a book about, you know, the gulags at the height of Stalin's Russia, you know, and you could see that as like one of the extremes of violence, where you completely depersonalize someone, lock them up, deprive them of all their privileges, strip away all their possessions, and turn them all against each other, actually, within the gulag as well at times. So that's an extreme of violence. But another act of, like, more everyday act of violence might be, well, you know, being snappy at people, might be gossiping at people or about people. It might mean, you know, shutting someone down in the conversation, you know, that could be seen as a subtle act of violence as well. So we're trying to move away from those acts where you impose your power upon other people in that way. And this is in a way that whenever we have an act of violence, whenever we act in the power mode, we're negating our basic humanity, our sense of solidarity with someone else, you know? So it's a breach of the fundamental human solidarity we have with everyone else. And then the love mode, by contrast, means obviously the opposite of this. So it means acting in ways which affirms and strengthens our connection with other people. It means acting in a way with an imaginative identification with other people. Really what it boils down to is like being able to imagine what it's like to be them. Yeah, being able to imagine what it's like to be them, and what that would look like, what that would feel like. One of the most powerful things you can do is imagine your way into someone else's shoes. You know, it's one of the most powerful things you can do. Shelley, the poet Shelley, I'll just do a short reading from him. So he says, the great secret of morals or ethics is love, or a going out of our nature, and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful, which exists in thought, action, or person not our own. A person, to be greatly good, must imagine intensely and comprehensively. They must put themselves in the place of another and of many others. The pains and pleasures of their species must become their own. So we must really work at imaginatively entering into the lives of others, he says. We must identify with the beautiful in other people, in their thoughts, in their actions, in their person. And we must imagine intensively and comprehensively. We must put ourselves in the place of another, and their pains and their pleasures must become our own. So that's really an excellent summary from the Western tradition, the Western literary tradition, of what the love mode is and avoiding the power mode. So we're trying to, really it boils down to being able to enter into someone else's shoes, yeah? Iris Murdoch puts it a bit more succinctly, but very well as well. She says, love is the difficult realization that other people are real. So love is the difficult realization that other people are real. So I think for me, what she means here is that so often we just see people as irritants or as sources of pleasure, you know? So we see a family member or a workmate, all they're there is to do is to irritate us, yeah? Or all our partners there to do is to provide pleasure for us, you know, or whatever it is. So we're trying to have that difficult realization that other people are real and live independent lives of us. They're not just there for our purposes to gratify or to get annoyed with. And if you can really see that another person's likes and dislikes, another person's hopes and dreams, another person's pains and pleasures are as real as our own, well, it's inevitable that love will then arise. So that's how we really cultivate love and empathy for other people. We see that they are just like us. They want to be happy. They have hopes and fears and dreams and so on. And we have to work at it. The way Shelley put it there, it's quite energetic, isn't it? It's asking a lot of us. He's saying we must imagine intensely and comprehensively. So that's quite an ask. And obviously that's the bar. That's the very high bar he's setting there. So our work with the love mode is to try and identify with other people. And what we're trying to do is move as much as we can from an exploitative state of mind, a state of mind that only sees people as means to getting what we want, to actually a human being just like us. So that's what it means really to move from the power mode to the love mode. Yeah, just to move from wanting something from people to actually appreciating. And I think it's important that Shelley mentioned beauty there. So if we can be in touch with the beauty in another person and appreciate that as well, that can be difficult at times to see with people who annoy us. But you know, that's what we're trying to do. And obviously it's complicated, you know. You might be at work and you might have to get people to work. You might be someone's boss at work, for example, and you need them to do work and they don't particularly want to do it for you, for example. And so you could argue that's an act of violence in theory, but the whole idea then is that sometimes you have to operate in the power mode. If you're a parent, for example, I'm sure you have to exercise. I'm not a parent myself, but I have plenty of nieces and nephews. And I'm sure you have to operate in the power mode regularly as a parent. You know, the kid wants to eat a whole bag of sweets or a whole packet of biscuits. And you say, no, you're not going to eat a packet of biscuits. And in a way, you're not letting them do what they want to do, but it is what you're trying to do when you do have to operate out the power mode. You're trying to let it be informed by the love mode. So rather than you saying that to the kid or doing that at work with the people who you employ, it's not done out of irritation or irritability or ill will or greed or whatever. It's done out of a sense of what we all agreed to, what's best, and so on. It's informed by the love mode, really. I remember when we're in the center we're in at the moment, when we were building the interiors for it. I was there with the builders one day, and we're all there just working away, and we looked around and there was a guy asleep on the couch for some reason who just appeared out of nowhere. And he was a Chinese guy who had fallen asleep, and he had 2 naggins of vodka poking out of each pocket, and the vodka was slowly seeping through his pockets and about to come onto our couch. And there wasn't any reasoning to be done there. The builders just lifted him up, set him outside the door very kindly, and put him on his way again. So that was the power mode being exercised, and they were very kind with him, actually. And what did he do? He ran around them, came back in, and was asleep again on the couch within 30 seconds again. So they had to do it again then, and this time they set him on a bit further on his path. So in a way, I think it was a good example of having to use the power mode sometimes, but they actually did it very well. I was very impressed with how non-irritated they were, and they took it in very good. They're actually like having a bit of a laugh with them as well, you know. So sometimes we have to use the power mode. But I think it is good to look at, can we operate more in the love mode, or do we default to a kind of slightly edgy, slightly aggressive power mode where we may not always need to do? Yeah. And can we imaginatively identify with other people? That's what it really boils down to. Yeah. So ethics is interrelational, and it boils down to being able to enter into someone else's world. So we'll do a reflection on that in a moment, just imagine reflecting on it. I think it's a really good reflection that we'll do in a minute. You have to pick someone or someone who really annoys you and try and enter into their world. We won't put you in breakout rooms to talk about it afterwards, don't worry. But is there any questions or any thoughts about that before we do the reflection? Anything sparked off? But Subhadra goes into it a lot more in her book, obviously, and it goes into it very well indeed. So I'll just give a second for any questions or comments to come through. It'd be lovely just to have everyone on mute, but I don't think it would work. Yeah. So Tony's asking, reflecting on my many relationships, inevitably many, if not all of my relationships involve the other person helping meet my needs. Yeah, emotional, romantic, for security, etc. Yeah. I think the way Bhante lays it out, Sangha actually lays it out there, and the way I've laid it out is very simplistic, actually. And there'll probably always be a subtle blending of the two. Yeah. So don't worry about that. So yes, there definitely sometimes we're friends with people. If we can be fair weather friends, and when things are more difficult between us, we can not be that keen to meet them because it's not as enjoyable. And I think it's important just to acknowledge that's how we are. We're not enlightened, I assume. And there will always be slightly mixed motives when it comes to our relationships with people. And that is just the nature of things. That's fine. That's just what it means to be a human being. So it's not that, so what we're trying to do is get better at it. So one of the images I was going to use later on is that if you're learning to play piano, you wouldn't, after a week of playing, start criticizing yourself for not being able to play Rachmaninoff's first piano concerto. You know what I mean? You'd actually still probably be on the scales at that stage, you know, learning your A and your B scales and so on. So what you're trying to do here is not be perfect. Remember, it's not about being good in any kind of like overly idealistic sense of the word, although, you know, Buddhism talks about moving towards perfection in some ways, you know, being fully free at least. But you're just trying to get better every day. That's what you're aiming for, trying to be a bit better every day, trying to work from the love mode a bit better every single day. And it's important to be kind to yourself in terms of recognizing that you're not perfect. That's completely fine to be not perfect, as long as you're heading in the right direction. So Kaylee's asking, when we know our values and know they are important to us, how do we stop ourselves from imposing them upon others, however well-meaning we might think we're being? Yeah. So that's a good question as well, actually. So, and there's a lot of ideology in the world at the moment, you know, so even with very well-meaning people can have ideologies both on the left and the right side of the political spectrum. And it's easy to just want to impose those upon other people. I'll make you free, God damn it. You know what I mean? And you're trying to avoid that. So the love mode really means not imposing your views upon other people. I think the best way to convince someone, if you really want someone to act in a certain kind of way, the best thing you can do is embody it yourself. Yeah, is exemplify it yourself. Exemplification, I think, is the best teacher of how to live for other people. And even forget about exemplifying in some ways, because if you set out to try and exemplify, you're probably just going to annoy people. You know what I mean? So the best thing to do is to live by the truth yourself, live by your values yourself, and that'll rub off on people, I think. I mean, that said, I think you can challenge people. So you know, is that what, like, do you really need to do that? You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it's very healthy for you. You know, you could ask questions like that, but you're not trying to impose them on anyone. Yeah, there's no conversion by the sword in Buddhism, so to speak. You know, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. Okay, so let's do a reflection, and if there's more questions, we can take them after the reflection. So why don't we set ourselves up to be comfortable? You can close your eyes if you wish. So settling into your posture, taking a deeper breath or two if you wish, following your breath in your belly. It's very good when you're reflecting to bring yourself down into your body. You tend to actually reflect more with your heart and your guts than your head. And we're going to practice imaginatively identifying with someone else. Now, we're going to focus on someone that annoys you. You could also do the practice with or using something that you really admire about someone else, but it tends to work better this way, I'm afraid, when you focus on something that annoys you. So perhaps now bringing to mind someone in your life that does actually annoy you, or something that they do that annoys you. Perhaps your housemates don't do all the washing up and leave it for you. Maybe someone at work is very loud and makes a clatter around you in a very unmindful way that annoys you. Maybe your partner has some kind of habit that they do that annoys you. And our tendency is often to think that they're doing this thing just to annoy us. But just for this exercise, I want you to leave that aside. Once you've picked the person and the behavior, I want you to leave that aside. And what we're going to do is we're going to put ourselves as vividly as we can in their shoes. So I want you now to imagine yourself as vividly as you can. Imagine that you are them doing this thing. Yeah. Imagine that you are them doing this thing. Leaving aside any analysis of it, just imagine you're just there doing this thing that they're doing. I'm just going to spend 2 or 3 minutes just playing that out, imagining you're them doing this thing, whatever it is. What does it feel like to be them doing this thing? What do you think their world is like as they do it? And being generous in your imagination, giving them the benefit of the doubt. And now ask yourself, still imagining yourself being them, how am I feeling as I'm doing this? What am I thinking? How am I feeling as I am doing this? What am I thinking? And the more you can suspend your own narrative, the better. You're really trying to enter into their world. Let go. You might even feel a relief at letting go of your own narrative and just really try and imagine yourself as them and ask yourself, what am I thinking as I'm doing this? What am I feeling and thinking? What are my motivations for doing this? Why am I doing this? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Why am I doing this? What does it look like to me? What might it look like to me? Okay, and letting go now of imagining being that person, coming back to yourself. how do you feel about that person now and that particular action? Having imagined your way into their shoes, do you find that you relate to it differently now that you've done that? Has it made any difference to you? How do you feel about it? What have we learned? How do we feel towards the person? Great. And then letting go of the reflection and just sitting for a few moments, just again feeling our body, having a sense of the room. And when you're ready, then bringing the practice to a close, bringing the reflection to a close, and opening your eyes again. Okay, so I'd be curious to hear how you got on there if you want to write anything in the chat box. So hopefully you're able to imaginatively identify. Hopefully you didn't just make it worse by getting into stories about how the person was. So Eileen's already said, I imagined him feeling different to how I'd normally assume he feels. It can be quite a surprise to enter into someone else's world. How would you know if you're right? I guess you'll never know, but I mean, you do feel, you said, you go on to say, I feel more empathetic though. So that is a good thing. What you're trying to do is be more empathetic to people, kind of see things from their perspective a bit more, or just realize they are like you. So let's have a few comments about that. Someone's just messaged privately, I feel more patient towards the individual because of their circumstances, though still mindful of my boundaries. That's fine. It's fine to have boundaries. Yeah. I feel less annoyed by their behavior. That's good, isn't it? That's great. More empathetic. Yeah, good. Yeah. I understand their perspective and the emotions they're going through. Yeah. So it's interesting. What's the best thing to do when you're ardent able to be in someone else's shoes because they're going through an experience you've never been through? Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. So you know, it is interesting because you can't know what it's like to lose someone, for example, bereavement, if you've never had it happen to you yourself. I think. I mean, it's very difficult. Maybe it's a better way of putting it. And I guess you just have to, you just try and be kind, be empathetic, you know, and just realize the limits of what you can do at the moment. You know, don't, you know, let's say with bereavement, don't, you know, don't offer advice. Just try and be kind and take them in. And that's all someone usually wants in that situation. They don't want to be told how to make it better, and they just want a sense of someone being kind to you. Really, that's what you want. Or if you're ill, yeah, sure, people can get you stuff, but really a lot of the time what you need is just someone to be sympathetic and kind. And I'm sure we're all able to be kind, you know. So you just do your best, Olivia. Cassia says, I don't take it personally. That's good. One of the big things about our difficulties is we take things so personally. We take things so personally. And I think a lot of ethical practices actually is learning how not to take things so personally. And that's the sign of spiritual progress, I think. Yeah, Valerie as well was saying, I don't feel, it's not so much that you feel empathetic, but you feel less, you take it less personally. That's good. Um, Janet said that she became aware of a deep layer of distress that has an effect on their behavior. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So you can understand more where they come from. Tony, more empathetic, but a bit stirred up too. Yeah, I'm not surprised. That practice does stir us up. You know, we are entering into the lives of people we find difficult, you know. So Kelly asked a good question, how not to get lost in someone's behavior. I mean, I feel more empathetic towards her, however, her behavior is still aggressive. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, that makes everything all right. You know what I mean? But like, if someone is aggressive, they're being aggressive. There's no putting that, what's the phrase, sweeping that under the carpet, you know? But there's another line in the Dhammapada, that text I showed you earlier, just a few verses later, 3 verses later, when it says, hatred is never stilled by hatred here in the world. It is only stilled by love. This is the eternal law. Hatred is never stilled by hatred in the world. It is only stilled by love. This is the eternal law. And I remember a friend of mine who worked in this very competitive business, I think it was some kind of investment bank in Ireland. And him and this woman had been having a running battle for about 5 or 6 years together. And eventually he thought, I mean, this can be strange, but it happens like this. Why don't I put her in Metabhavana? It hadn't occurred to him up to now, you know, his loving kindness practice. And he just deliberately tried to be kind to her and take her in more. And suddenly, for no reason, they just became really good friends. You know, so I think when you meet, what was the word, aggressiveness with aggressiveness, it's only going to make things worse. But meeting aggressiveness with kindness and warmth can really unlock things in a way that's very hard to plan out beforehand. And I've seen this again and again that, I mean, I can't guarantee that it always will, but it's always better to respond creatively and kindly. Kindness is more creative, I think, than it is to polarize with the person again. So you'll have to try that out yourselves as well, obviously. But you don't try and get lost in their behavior, Kelly. Yeah, maybe you have to pull back a bit again and only empathize to the degree that you can. I'll talk a bit more about that later on tonight as well. Carolina says it always works. Great, good. Laura says, I feel less of that annoyed feeling physically, but intellectually I still think their behavior is annoying. If that makes sense, I guess it takes more than one reflection. Well, I think that you know, it's not asking you not to have a critique of their behavior. Yeah. So again, it's not about being nice or being good. Again, that's why the book is called this. You know, you could easily call the book, it's not about being nice. So it's not saying that you can't critique their behavior. It's just saying that you don't get annoyed with it. Yeah. You're trying to get over your ill will towards them, your negativity. It's perfect. Like I might not feel any antagonism towards someone, but still not be happy with their behavior. You know, so we have to separate out those two things. We have to be able to separate out being able to say, okay, that behavior isn't good, but I don't have to get annoyed with them about it. Do you know what I mean? So, so that's a really important distinction to be made. And I think often, so it's not about responding with anger. That's it. Yeah. So we don't have to get angry with people. I think sometimes with people, maybe it's a thing about Irish people not being very expressive in this regard. It's almost only when we get angry that we feel we can express ourselves truthfully, you know? And sometimes people get themselves angry so that they can actually then have the energy to express themselves. But actually, the more kindness you cultivate, the more meditation you do, for example, the better you are just saying things and saying them really kindly, actually, you know? And without any heat. And we'll come on to this next week when we look at the speech guidelines. So there's 4 speech guidelines that the Buddha gives. But basically he says, if you say something, if you speak out about behavior you're not happy with, it has to be done on the basis of kindness at an appropriate time. And it has to be obviously the truth as well, you know? So those 3 things have to be there for you to speak out. Anyways, we'll come back to that next week. Okay, so hopefully you found that reflection useful. So I'll just finish with a quote from Shantideva, who's a Tibetan teacher. Now, well, he's Indian actually, sorry, but he's a huge influence on the Tibetan Buddhism. Now, Indians, these guys tend to put it very extremely. So I'll unpack it a little bit afterwards. But he says, all those who suffer in this world do so because of their desire for their own happiness. All those happy in the world are so because of their desire for the happiness of others. So I don't think you can take that too literally, but what he's saying is, If you get exclusively preoccupied with you just being well and happy, you're going to make yourself unhappy. Yeah. But if you're really concerned with the happiness of everyone around you, you will be a happy person. Yeah, you will be happy in this world. Yeah. Okay, so that feels like a good point to take a short break. So why don't we just take a 5 minute comfort break, and maybe we could be back here ready to go at 22 minutes past, 23 minutes past, and just do what you need to do. So you can feel free to pause your cameras or whatever, and we'll be back here at 23 minutes past, and feel free to continue to write questions if you want into the chat box. Yep. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. So we'll kick off again in a minute. Okay, hopefully everyone is back. I'm not sure if you are yet. Don't forget that while we're waiting, you can write any other questions or comments in the chat. Just waiting to see if everyone is back. Looks like people are all coming back in. That's great. Okay. Okay, so Tony, are you back? I'm not sure if your video is on. Okay, so just to remind you about, let's just bring up this PowerPoint again. So just to remind you that all of our events, if you want to check out the website, we have lots of stuff on our website, dublinbuddhistcentre.org/online. And one of the things I wanted to mention as a big thing, if you know how to, well, if you know how to meditate, I was going to say, but even if you don't know how to meditate, we're going to be running a week-long retreat on the 2nd to the 9th of August, and that'll be a full week retreat, Sunday to Sunday. So if you haven't been on retreat before and you want to do a retreat from your house, it's only online, I'm afraid. Think about that. Think about coming along. So usually you come along for meditation in the morning, another meditation workshop mid-morning, something in the afternoon, and something in the evening every single day for that week. So, I mean, the best thing to do is to take a week off and join us. But even if you can't do that, you join in for whatever parts of it you can, and just kind of try and structure your week to be a week of practice. And it's suitable for any level of experience, whether you're complete newcomers to meditation or very experienced, and it'll be exploring Buddhism and meditation that week. There'll be more details on our website probably tomorrow about that. And don't forget that the course is being offered completely free, so we're happy to offer all of our online events at the moment for free. If you can make a donation, that would really help us, because we're almost entirely dependent upon donations at the moment. So I think Tony will share those links in the chat box at the moment. DublinBuddhistCentre.org/donate. You can set up a standing order there if you wish, which really helps us. Or there's a direct path to PayPal there with paypal.me/DublinBuddhistCentre. Very quick if you want to give some money that way. So do have a think about that if you can. Yeah. So a couple of just one question that came in during the break there is someone was asking, we talk about saying, being concerned with the happiness of others, and the concern was that we might get too bogged down with the happiness of others, and so on, and feel worried or anxious when those around me are not happy. So we can't control people. And I think Buddhism uses this phrase, the happiness of others, but really what it means is just trying to be kind in your interactions with people. And what I think mainly, the main way we're kind with people is just by taking them in, giving them our time and energy, asking how they are. I mean, obviously, sometimes people need more than that. People need money, or we can give in lots of different ways. But really, a lot of the time, it's particularly in lockdown, I think, it's not getting narky with people, not getting annoyed with people, trying to take people in, spending a bit of time with them, asking them how they are, listening to them carefully. Those are kind of the acts of kindness that I'm talking about. I mean, in a way, kindness should be really simple. You know what I mean? We don't need to complicate it that too much, yeah. So that's what I mean by being concerned with the happiness of others. It's not that you can make people happy. You can't make people happy, really. Happiness has to come from them. But so what we're really talking about is helping them feel met, helping them feel supported, engaging with them. And actually, to be honest, most of the time, you know, I think I need this or that, but really what I just need is to be met by someone. That's where a lot of my happiness comes from in my life, by being really met by someone and being really seen by other people and being heard by other people. So I think that's the main way in which we can offer kindness to other people. Yeah. Someone else was asking about the Indian quote. Louise, well, I gave the name away there. Sorry, I'll send that quote out in the email this week from Shanti Deva. Let me just take a note of that in email. Okay, good. So what it said was, all those who suffer in this world do so because of their desire for their own happiness. All those happy in this world are so because of their desire for the happiness of others. And again, I mean, you know, it's not saying that you shouldn't look after yourself either, obviously, but you can't just exclusively be looking after yourself. Okay, so let's keep going. So the next bit I want to talk about is about this idea of a sphere of concern. So we have what you might call a sphere of concern, which is the people that you naturally care for, the people that you naturally are concerned for. So I remember when a few years ago there was flooding in Cork. My brother lives down in Cork, and my immediate thought was, oh, I hope his house isn't affected. Yeah. And then when his house wasn't affected, I was quite relieved that it wasn't his house, because I'd heard that many houses were affected. So in a way, it's very, my sphere of concern there, the people I was concerned with was very limited just to my family members. Or, you know, I'm sure you've had that feeling as well, where you hear there's you know, tonight a car crash happened in County Roscommon. And, you know, I'm from South Roscommon, and I kind of hope, oh God, I hope none of that was anyone I know or my family, you know. And then you realize it was the other end of Roscommon, so you're fine, you can relax again. So I mean, that's completely understandable, you know what I mean? So it's not that this concern for our family is a bad thing and our friends is a bad thing. It's actually really, really good. And but one way of looking at what we're trying to do with ethics is we're trying to expand that sphere of concern out beyond the people immediately in our family and our friendships to include everyone. Yeah, now that might seem crazy if that's possible, but there's images given in the Pali, in the old Buddhist texts, and apparently that is what a Buddha could do. He would feel deep loving kindness for all beings, regardless of his connection to them. In a very famous text, which is basically the seminal text on loving kindness, the image is, as a mother for her only child, so should we cultivate a heart of love for the world. You know, as a mother for her only child, so should we cultivate a heart of love for the whole world. And in another place, the Buddha says that in terms of the negative, in terms of ill will, he says, even if you're grabbed by bandits and they hold you down and they're cutting you in half with a big saw with one person on each end, pulling on each end, even if you're being chopped in half like that, you should never have even the slightest trace of ill will towards them. So that really puts it up to us. I mean, he's not saying, you know, that you necessarily would allow yourself to get chopped in half if you could help it. You know, you might decide to, you know, push them down and run away, you know what I mean? But you can do all that without any ill will. And I'm sure some of you have read about great practitioners in Tibet when the Chinese invaded. One of the things that some of the deep practitioners were very concerned with, even as they were being tortured by members of the Chinese military and so on, that they wouldn't hate their imprisoners, you know, they wouldn't succumb to hatred. So hatred is something to be avoided in all situations in Buddhism, and it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. We don't need to hate people. So when we expand out our sphere of concern, we're firstly trying not to hate anyone or dislike anyone in the sense of irritability or ill will. And secondly, we're trying to ultimately care for everyone as much as we would for our closest friends and our closest family. Now again, that might seem crazy to us. And in a way, it is a bit crazy. You know, I don't even know if he'd be recognizably human if he would do that, but that's what a Buddha could do in a way. The other thing to say around this is that it does start with the people around us. So trying to show a little bit more concern and a little bit less irritation to the people around us. So a really good example of this, I think, is when you're living with people. And this example I'm going to give isn't pertinent to Tony or anyone at the moment that we live together, the other guys in the house together either. But it's very common apparently in house shares of any sort, and particularly spiritual communities, to feel like you're doing more work than anyone else. Yeah, in terms of the house duties and the washing up and the cleaning and so on. And it's even possible for everyone in the house to feel like they're doing more work than everyone else, which is obviously impossible. You know, and I've gotten into that situation where I felt like I've been doing more work than anyone else, and I've gotten irritated with people. Not at the moment, thankfully, in this configuration, I'm very happy to say. But it's interesting because that can kind of build up and it becomes hardened and people can get cut off from each other. But then what cuts through it can just be a simple act of kindness, a simple act of friendliness, a simple act of love. And when someone does that, then all that story that you had about how they're not doing as much as you're doing and they should do more, it just disappears. It just disappears. It gets cut through by a single act of kindness. So kindness is so important, it's so powerful that it is important. Like, it can feel like everything's just getting really, really intense and the relationship's going very challenging and, you know, it's all very complex. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can just cut through it all by taking them in, asking how they are and so on. So you're expanding out your sphere of concern even to include the people who annoy you, you know? And small and kind of little pernicious irritations can build up and build up to be big things, actually, you know, and it can be such a relief to be free of them by simple acts of kindness. So I'd really encourage you to try and expand out then your sphere of concern, just like in that text. So someone's just asked the name of that text again. It's called the Karaniya Metta Sutta. I might just type that name in. It's called the Metta Sutta, or the Karaniya Metta Sutta. Sutta is just the word for text. You can look that up on the internet, but maybe I'll send out a copy of that with the notes as well. Or at least a link to it. Then the next, so if you have any questions, keep sending them in. The next thing then is, well, you know, we've talked about imaginatively identifying with people, but what if you just can't imagine why someone is acting in such a strange way? Yeah. So I'm sure some of you have been wondering this, like, you just cannot imagine why anyone would do that behavior that they do. And I've certainly met people where it's been very, very hard to enter into their shoes and work out why they're doing things in a certain kind of way. But the Buddhist perspective is, and sometimes, where I see this most clearly is where people are in very, very self-destructive, say, romantic relationships or bad romantic relationships, where they act in ways that are just mad. Nothing, like, the only way to describe them is mad from the outside. And obviously we've all gone probably a bit mad as well ourselves with romantic relationships, but sometimes it's very difficult to imagine why someone is acting so, well, to your eyes, foolishly. And from a Buddha's point of view, how the Buddha would see the world and how the Buddha would see all beings is that everyone acts in a way that they think will bring them happiness. Everyone acts in a way that they think will bring them happiness, even if it's severely misguided, severely delusional. This is the human predicament. We all act in ways that we think will bring us happiness. We all act in ways that we think will bring us happiness. And even if you can't enter into the why of their doing that, you know, and imaginally identify with them and enter their world about why they're doing that, at least you can kind of have a sense, okay, I don't really understand this, but I think they must be doing it to be happy. Even that can help us expand out our sphere of concern. And another thing to say is that, you know, people do cause themselves a lot of strong suffering. And the Buddhist response to suffering is metta. And then when metta, kindness, meets someone's suffering, it turns into something slightly different called compassion or karuna. Compassion isn't a great word, I think, because it's a bit loaded with other meanings. But what you're trying to do is just have a real tender empathy with people if you can, even if you don't understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And not our usual response to strong suffering in people is to be slightly horrified by it and want to pull away. So you're trying to cultivate a strength of kindness that you can really take them in. And that's all you need to do, really. There's a traditional Tibetan saying, because you know, in India and Tibet and in the East, they believe in rebirth, but they have a traditional reflection which goes something like this. All beings who are my mother and father wander in samsara, wander in the world. And so with unbearable longing, I cultivate the unbearable longing to become a Buddha. So I'll read that again in a second, but they would be of the view that because the world has gone on for so long, the universe has gone on for so long, that at some point, every person was either my mother or my father. You know, everyone's been reborn so often, gone back so long. The Buddha apparently looked back to his previous lives and couldn't find any beginning. You know, there's lots of different worlds and universes in Buddhism. Now, take it out as you will. There's no proof for it, obviously, scientifically. But anyways, I think I think it's still a useful reflection. All beings who are my mother and father wander in samsara, wander in the world. And so with unbearable longing, I cultivate the unbearable longing to become a Buddha. So it's this unbearable longing that, like, if we see our parents suffering, it's rather unbearable if we can't alleviate their suffering. So a Buddha would experience everyone as being as important as their mother or father. So it's a kind of an unbearable longing to want to ease someone's suffering, to ease everyone's suffering. So I think it's a lovely evocative flavor of what you know, an outpouring of compassion would look like. And having said all that, we have to look after our own oxygen mask first. You know those messages on the planes where, you know, when the oxygen mask's down, you put on your own oxygen mask first before you help the person beside you or your kids or whatever, because you're no use to anyone otherwise. And so how we have this compassion for other people is we cultivate metta ourselves first. We cultivate loving kindness ourselves through meditation or whatever other way we look at it. And then compassion that we bring to other people is what the poet Tennyson called a painless sympathy with pain. So we're not overwhelmed by their suffering. It's painless in that regard. It's kind of beautiful, actually, compassion, but we have a deep sympathy with their pain. So compassion is a painless sympathy with pain. Okay, so one of the ways we can do this, Subhadra Mati on page 45 has a practice suggestion in her book that's going to be mirrored, so you can't quite see that. But I'll just read it out very briefly. So she says, in the next day or so, do something for someone else where there's nothing obvious in it for you. You could even do it anonymously. Make the effort to take the person in and check as best you can that what you choose to do is truly helpful, and do so as wholeheartedly as you can. Yeah. So do something for someone else where you're not going to get a benefit, and you might not even be recognized for doing it. Anonymous acts of kindness if you can, you know. And afterwards then she says, reflect, what effect did it have on you? What effect did it have on the other person? Might it have had on the other person? And would you like to keep doing it? Yeah. So look at the effect it has on you. What do you think the effect it has on the other person? And would you like to keep doing this practice of reaching out, of being kind to other people? Yeah. So that's part of your homework as well this week, is to try out random acts of kindness. Yeah. Kelly's just asked a good question. Is it possible to not hate someone, but still want to stay away from them? So sometimes all you can hope for is not to hate someone. Yeah. And for some of us, that would be quite an achievement, actually, given our relationship. So I have people, even friends of mine in the Buddhist community, who at times the most I can do is not get annoyed at them. Yeah. And that is actually not a bad going, I have to say. So if all you can do with a difficult person is not to get annoyed, I think that deserves a pat on the back, actually. Yeah. And down the line, you can hope to have more loving kindness for them. But at the very least, try not to get stuck into ill will for them, you know. And maybe that's all you can do right now. Or maybe all you can do right now is notice that you're getting annoyed and pull it back a little bit. Yeah. So again, remember, you're not trying to play Rachmaninoff's piano concerto after a week of learning the piano. It really is a matter of practice and getting better at it, and so on. So someone's just sent in a question that I'll come back to again, or I might message them separately because it's a bit complex. Annie, there's, yeah, so anyway, that's the practice suggestion. Any questions or comments on any of that? And just to emphasize again that ethics is a skill. It's something that we will get better at over time, you know. We'll learn quite a few, well, a few of you have asked, well, what does kindness look like? How, you know, how does living by our values look like? And I think in a way, the purpose of this course is to discover what that looks like for you as well. So don't expect to have all the answers straight away. I really do mean it when I say that some of the kindest things we can do to people, some of the kindest things we can do for people rather, is just really to take them in a bit more and to empathize with them and care for them in that way, you know. And again, remember that it's a skill or an art. We don't have to be perfect at it straight away. Yeah. So where does the concept of forgiveness fit into the ethics of metta? So that's a really good question. We're going to look at that a bit in week 5 when we look at what to do when we fall short. But it might well be that we have to practice forgiveness. And it might be that we, like metta, I mean, I'm presenting it very broad brush strokes here. The act of getting into a sense of kindness and connection with people again might involve having to have some unpleasant discussions, actually, you know. It might mean having to talk to people about how they've behaved. It might mean having to talk to people about how you've behaved and apologize, and so on. So in a way, it's like there's so much that can happen in that becoming kind. I remember one person, he was a bit of a madman, actually. I mean that in a good way. And when he came across meditation and loving kindness in particular, he decided he wanted to go around the country of Ireland and apologize to everyone he'd ever wronged. And I think, as far as I know, he traveled around the country doing that. And I was very impressed. I don't think I'd be able to do that myself. I mean, my memory isn't good enough for a start of who I did wrong over my life. But I thought that was really interesting. And similarly with forgiveness, we might just need to forgive. And to forgive really comes out of an empathy for the other person, understanding, maybe like we did in the exercise, what led them to do that thing, and choosing ultimately to let it go. That's what forgiveness ultimately means, choosing ultimately to let it go. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to fully, you know, you can forgive someone something, but at the same, how do I put this that isn't unkind? You might decide that you can't really trust them fully in that arena again. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean being nice again necessarily. It might be that, okay, that person lied to me there. Okay, I forgive them for that. I'm going to let that go. Like, they're a human being and so on. But it's natural then to weigh up what they say to you in the future. You know what I mean? And have and kind of, well, okay, so you know that is a natural response then that I think is quite understandable, actually. You know. Anyways, Paul, I'll say more about forgiveness in yeah, forgive but not forget is what sometimes. I mean, try and give people the benefit of the doubt as well, obviously, if you can. Someone else asks, in the midst of trying to be metaful in difficult exchanges, my main difficulty seems to be the resentment of the idea that I'm working so hard and the other person or people is not, or not, and that I'm being held to a different standard. So that is a real difficulty. And I'm not sure the best way to do that. I think you just have to let go of it. And basically, for me, a lot of the time, it's, well, look, I'll do the best I can. And if they do what they can, that's great. And if not, at least I've done what I can. That's how I think of it. I do the best I can. And even if you do the best you can and nothing happens out of it, well, you can usually walk away with a cleaner sense of a conscience. If you don't do the best you can, you'll walk away feeling, I could have done better there. Yeah. And so it's not a given that you'll be able to sort out all your relationships. The Buddha couldn't, like, plenty of people were really like pissed off with the Buddha, for example, and he wasn't able to get into harmony with them because they were too hostile, you know. And so he just eventually walk away, you know, obviously with kindness, you know. So we can't make people like us, we can't make people agree with us, but at least you can own your side of it and do the best you can and walk away with a clear conscience. And it might well have more of an effect than you think. Carolina points out you only need one to tango. That's true, in a way. And ill will is harmful for you primarily, never mind the other person. Okay, so you do the best you can. Yeah. Let's look at the home practice for this week. So we're nearly at the end. So let's look at the home practice. So I want you to do things at home. Yeah. So the home practice for the coming week. If you can, I'd like you to read chapter 2 of the book, and I'd really encourage you to get the book if you haven't got it already. I'd really encourage you to get it for as soon as you can. The links are in last week's email. Yeah, if you don't have them, drop me a line. If you didn't get the email, drop me a line. Oh, sorry. The other thing is you can also read chapter 3 if you have time, because it will feed into next week. But the main reading is for chapter 2, and if you don't get chapter 3 done, don't worry about it. If you don't get chapter 2 done, don't worry about it. What's following is actually more important. So what I'd like you to do is to try and do that thing we were talking about earlier on, moving more from the power mode to the love mode. So you might practice empathizing more with people, kind of getting into their skins, getting into their world. You could do that reflection we did before the break again if you want. I think that's a really powerful reflection, actually, if you're having difficulty with people. If you've done the meditation course with us, you might like to do more loving kindness practice. Metta Bhavana means the development of loving kindness. Do more of that practice this week. Make sure you meditate every day. The next thing you might like to try is a kind action every day, like in that suggestion that I read out. Keep reaching out to people. So random acts of kindness, or maybe not so random, very deliberate acts of kindness, you could say. I only mentioned this one earlier in passing, but you might like to take on being vegetarian or vegan this week, or even more if you're not fully vegetarian and not fully vegan, maybe you could be more vegetarian and more vegan this week. So if there's an option to be more vegetarian, for example, try and take it. If there's an option to be more vegan, take it. Or you might like to try a week of just being vegetarian. So we've never lost anyone yet. No one's ever died by becoming a vegetarian in a week on this course, yeah? So you'll be fine if you want to try it out. And there's lots of really good ways and really good foods out there and really good resources to be vegetarian. So maybe what I'll do is I'll send out the retreat recipes as well that we use on our retreats. If you want to try those out, there's some really nice recipes there if you want to start cooking more vegetarian. And even if it's one day a week, it'll make a difference and get you more used to it. But really try and go vegetarian, because when you're not vegetarian, you're asking someone else usually to kill an animal for you, you know. And it's not in the spirit, Buddhism would say, of the precept of kindness and not causing harm. Anyways, I'm not going to be a fundamentalist or anything, but it's what I'd like to ask you to try that out anyway. And record how you get on with all of these in your notebook. So I don't know if anyone kept the notebook. Maybe you could say in the chat box if you did keep the notebook and if you found it useful. But you might like to write down how you got on with trying to be kind to people today. Write down anything that struck you from chapter 2 that you want to remember. Write down how you got on with empathizing with other people. Write down maybe your intentions for being more vegetarian and how you got on, that kind of thing. It's really good to record these things in your little book, and nobody else is going to read your book, hopefully, but you. And it can help you to do so. It can help you to work in that way. Sorry, I'll share that again for one more minute. So if you have any questions or thoughts on the home practice, do ask, do let me know. So Sam says, notebook, highly recommended. Accountability, I often forget otherwise. That's a really good point, Sam, thank you. So it makes you remember to do it. And again, one of the main reasons people don't do the home practice is because they forget to do the home practice. So if you have a notebook beside your bed and you're writing in it every night, you have something to remind you. But also during your day, if you do get into unkindness, you think, oh, I'll have to write about this in my notebook later on tonight. And it might actually prevent you from doing that, yeah. So do feel free to write in any other comments or questions that you have. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is, let's see, how much time do we have? Let's just do a reflection now. There isn't quite enough time to go back into groups, I think. So let's just close our eyes again and set ourselves up, and we'll just do a reflection for a few minutes, and then maybe we'll hear from a few of you afterwards about what you intend to do this week. So the reflection will be about what you want to do this week in particular, what you want to take away from today's class. So settling in, closing your eyes, maybe taking a deeper breath or two down into your belly. So first of all, tuning into how you're feeling now after that week, after this week's class. How is your body feeling? How are you emotionally? And breathing with this, if that makes it easier to stay with, or if that's helpful. And bringing to mind anything that particularly struck you this week from the material that we've just looked at. Is there anything that particularly struck you this week? That's striking to you, that you really want to remember, that you really want to take back into your life? Or that occurred to you during the night's course? Is there anything you want to do then? Any action you want to remember to do this coming week? Is there anyone specifically you want to engage more with out of kindness? Is there anyone you need to empathize more with? Is there any particular acts of kindness you want to do? Is there anything you want to do around becoming more vegetarian or vegan? Staying with one or two actions you want to do in the coming week, just letting them sink more deeply into your being so you're more likely to act upon them. And then bringing the practice to a close, bringing the reflection to a close. You might want to write down afterwards anything you need to remember, to remind yourself of what you want to do, your actions. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. It'd be really lovely if some of you want to share in the chat what you want to do this week as well, just so we can see, so we can all see each other and what we plan to do in the coming week. So it'd be great to hear from a few of you. Particularly if you're at a keyboard and you haven't said anything yet, it'd be lovely to hear from you as well. Great. Thanks, Eileen. Eileen's going to try being vegan for the week, or I'm vegetarian, so I'm definitely going to make an effort to be more vegan this week. I'm almost vegan, but not fully. Dimitra is going to go vegetarian. She's Greek, so it's a challenge. Yeah. Laura's going to check my notes from tonight each morning. That's great. That's a really good idea. Mairead's going to practice empathy. Paula's going to go to the shop tomorrow and buy a notebook. Thanks, Sandra, for that message. Julianne's going to try not to eat meat, get a notebook, try to be kinder. Good. Eat more ethically. Thanks, Paul. That line you said, you're getting someone else to kill an animal for you. That's very true. And in the meat industry, like, there's huge problems with mental health and stuff like that. And well, you know, anyways, I will read Fast Food Nation if you want a very grim picture of the American meat industry, for example. Okay, good. That's a few nice comments. Keep them coming in if you want. Try and do something extra sweet for my husband and my cat every day. That's great. And they're 99.999% vegan. That's great. It's impossible to be fully vegan, I think. You know, there'll always be something that has something in it, but you try your best, obviously. Send cards to loved ones and to cook one new vegetarian recipe. That's a lovely, yeah, nice to send cards, you know, in these COVID times. Practice metta bhavana every morning and evening. Be more empathetic, listen more, being aware and turning up to the moment. That's great, Jimmy. I think that's really good ways of living out your values, living out kindness. Okay, so we're nearly out of time. Next week, Kathy's going to read the book. That's great. That's an act of kindness, I think, in itself. So we're nearly out of time. So next week we'll be looking at the exemplar of Buddhism, who is the Buddha, and what he says is the best way to live. So we're going to look at his 10 guidelines for living, 10 ethical precepts, we call them, but they're guidelines or training principles for how we can live really well in the world. And we'll look at that next week when we come back. So it was lovely being in the course. I'll just read out a couple more because there's some nice ones coming in. Miriam has offered to make, let's see, who was it again? Julianne, a nice Greek spinach copetta, is that how you pronounce it? And she's going to read chapters 2 and 3. That's great. Tony's going to try and be less selfish and really expand his circle of concern, even though it feels super comfortable and secure right now. It's interesting, in the lockdown, your circle of concern can really shrink to just the people you live with. So it can be an extra effort at the moment to expand it out. Anyways, lovely getting all those comments. What we'll do now is I'll just stop the recording, and we'll see you next week for looking at the guidelines.